There is a particular kind of silence that follows a disappearance. Not the silence of an empty room, not the silence of a quiet morning. The silence of a life that was full and no longer is. In 1248, in the city of Konya, in what is now central Turkey, a scholar named Jalaluddin Rumi was living inside that silence. The man who had caused it was named Shams of Tabriz, a wandering mystic who had arrived 4 years earlier with no institution behind him, no fixed home, no recognizable place in the world. Rumi had spent his life inside. In those 4 years, he had changed Rumi more completely than anything that came before. And then, without warning, without farewell, he was gone. Konya continued as it always had. The markets opened each morning. Students came for lessons. Prayers were called across the rooftops 5 times a day. Rumi kept his obligations. And somewhere beneath all of that, the teaching, the prayers, the daily structure that held everything in place, he was trying to figure out what to do with what had been left behind. Those who spent time around Rumi in this period noticed something they struggled to put into words. Later biographical accounts describe a particular quality of stillness that hadn't been there before. A way of pausing mid-sentence as though something had moved through the room and he was waiting for it to settle before continuing. Whether these accounts are precise recollections or later reconstructions shaped by the legend that grew around Rumi, it is difficult to say with certainty. What the sources agree on is simpler. He continued teaching, and those around him watched him carefully. His students, including, according to some accounts, the same ones who had resented Shams, now sat with their own particular silence. The details of what they felt are not recorded directly. We have only what later writers chose to preserve, but the accounts agree on one thing. He was there, and somehow at the same time, he wasn't entirely there. At some point, the sources disagree on exactly when, Rumi decided to go to Damascus. The journey from Konya meant crossing several hundred miles of difficult terrain. Mountains in the west of Anatolia, open plains, river crossings, roads that became uncertain in poor weather. Weeks of travel by horseback through towns that had no particular reason to remember a scholar from Konya passing through. He went anyway. According to the accounts that survive, he went looking for Shams. What exactly he did once he arrived, which streets he walked, how long he stayed, precisely who he spoke to, the historical record does not tell us in reliable detail. Later biographical sources describe him asking strangers about a wandering mystic with no fixed address, no institution, no recognizable place in the world. Whether those details are historically precise or later elaborations shaped by the story's retelling, historians cannot say with confidence. What seems reasonably established is that he returned to Konya without finding Shams. Some sources describe a second journey to Damascus. Others are less clear on this point. The accounts are not consistent, and historians have noted the difficulty of separating biographical fact from the layers of legend that accumulated around Rumi's life in the centuries after his death. What the sources suggest, taken together, is that the searching stopped. He came back and did not go again. Everyone who tells this story focuses on what Rumi lost. Fewer people ask why Shams stopped for Rumi in the first place. Shams had been traveling for years before he arrived in Konya in 1244. He had passed through Baghdad, through Tabriz, through other major cities of the Islamic world. He had encountered scholars, teachers, learned men throughout his travels. He had not stayed for any of them. He came to Konya, he met Rumi, and he stayed. Of all the scholars in the 13th century Islamic world, why this one? The historical record offers possibilities. Later writers offer theories. None of them fully agree. Whatever Shams saw in Rumi, it was enough to make him stop. And whatever happened between them was enough to alter the course of both their lives. The question remains. The searching was over. Not because he had found what he was looking for, but because the searching itself had run out. He was home. Shams was not coming back. In the years that followed, later sources describe something beginning to change in how Rumi moved through the world, not in his formal teaching or his theological positions. in something harder to categorize, something the biographical accounts attempt to describe without entirely agreeing on the details. The scholar who had entered these years was not quite the same man who was emerging from them. There was a man in Konya named Salah Zarkub, a goldsmith by trade, not a scholar, not a theologian, someone who worked with his hands and had known Rumi for some years without occupying any formal position in his circle. Later biographical accounts describe Rumi stopping in the street outside Zarkub's workshop, standing still, listening to the rhythmic sound of hammers striking gold, and beginning to turn, slowly, arms open, eyes nearly closed, not performing anything for the people passing by, just turning. This account appears in sources written after Rumi's death, and historians note that such stories were shaped by the devotional tradition that formed around his memory. Whether this specific episode happened exactly as described, or whether it is one of several scenes that accumulated around the historical figure over time, cannot be established with certainty. What the historical record does support is that in these years Rumi moved towards Sama, a form of spiritual practice built around listening. Music played, poetry sung aloud, the body occasionally responding to what was happening inside. This much the sources consistently describe. The gatherings that formed around him in this period are documented, though the details vary between accounts. Later sources describe Rumi listening in ways those around him found difficult to account for. Sometimes, according to these accounts, he wept. Sometimes he turned, that slow, deliberate turning that would eventually become the defining image of the Mevlevi tradition. Whether Rumi formalized the practice of whirling himself, or whether it developed around him and was attributed to him after his death, is a question historians continue to debate. What the sources consistently agree on is this: the man described in accounts from this period is recognizably different from the composed scholarly figure of his earlier years. Through all of this, the gatherings, the music, the slow return to ordinary life, Rumi was writing. Not the way he had written before. For most of his career, the surviving record shows him writing as scholars write, with structure, with argument, from a settled position. What emerged in these years was something different. He wrote poetry in what the surviving texts suggest was a sustained and driven outpouring. Poems that read less like formal compositions and more like a conversation that had been interrupted and was being continued regardless. On the page, alone, without certainty that anyone would read them. He named this collection the Divan-e Shams-e Tabrizi, the works of Shams of Tabriz. He gave the entire collection the name of the man who was gone, and then he placed Shams inside the poems themselves, not as a memory or a theological concept, but as a presence that keeps returning. One poem opens, "Where did you go? Where did you go, oh, my beloved soul?" Another, "I have lived on the lip of insanity, wanting to know reasons, knocking on a door. It opens. I have been knocking from the inside." Shams appears across hundreds of poems in the collection, sometimes addressed directly, sometimes searched for through streets and crowds. Sometimes his name appears mid-line, almost involuntarily, the way a name surfaces in thought before you realize you were thinking of it. For a man of Rumi's standing, this kind of exposure was unusual for his time and place. The formal conventions of Islamic scholarship did not typically accommodate this. Whether Rumi was fully conscious of how unusual it was, or whether the writing existed initially as something private that was later collected and preserved, the sources do not make entirely clear. What remains is the writing itself, and it reads whatever its original context, like something written from inside an experience, rather than at a careful distance from it. Years passed. Rumi was in his 50s now. The gatherings around him had grown. His teaching continued. Among his students was a young man named Husam Chalabi. Husam came from a prominent Konya family. According to later accounts, he had been with Rumi for years, attentive not only to what Rumi said in formal settings, but to what he wrote and recited in quieter moments. He had been reading the fragments, the incomplete pieces, verses that seemed to belong to something larger that had never been continued. The traditional account of how the Masnavi began runs as follows. Husam came to Rumi one day carrying a small bundle of pages, verses Rumi had apparently set aside, the beginning of something that had never been finished. Husam read them aloud. Listen to the reed, how it tells a tale of separation. It sings of all the times it has been cut away. Since I was cut from the reed bed, men and women have wept with my crying. He finished reading. Then he asked Rumi to continue. According to this account, preserved in sources written after Rumi's death and shaped in part by the devotional tradition that formed around him, Rumi reached into his robe and produced 18 more verses he had already written. Lines that followed directly from what Husam had just read aloud, as though he had been waiting for someone to ask. How much of this account is precise historical record and how much is later tradition, scholars have discussed at length. What is not disputed is the result. Rumi and Husam worked together for years, Rumi dictating, Husam writing, the lines read back, the work revised and continued. And what accumulated from those sessions, without ceremony, without any sense of monument being constructed, was the Masnavi, 6 books, 25,000 lines. But before any of that vastness, before the theology and the parables and the arguments spread across 6 volumes, there is a single opening image. The first thing Rumi chose to say, a reed flute, cut from the reed bed where it grew, taken from its place, far now from where it came from, making a sound. Listen to the reed, how it tells a tale of separation. That is where the Masnavi begins, not with a doctrine, not with a declaration, with a sound, with something crying from having been cut away from where it belonged. Why that image? The question will have to wait. Part 3 continues the story,